much of the chore of chanting is when the mind's actually just been allowed to go completely ill-disciplined and flabby and wandered all over the shop. And after a while, I think just the fruit of the offensive chanting comes back as, I'm over this, which is then is a course of a wrestling with the mind.
This is episode 17 of the Successful Vaishnavas podcast. We're talking to Damodar Prabhu about the 7 habits of highly effective people. It's time to get inspired. Join us as we celebrate devotee success stories. Preaching, business, community development, leadership and personal growth, all from the point of view of Krishna consciousness. Our goal? To help you to make your life successful. Hare Krishna. This is Krishna Das. Back again with another episode of Successful Vaishnavas. This is episode number 17. And with any luck, this will be this will be the third week in a row that the new podcasts have been released. So in this this week's episode, we'll be sharing an interview that I did with Damodar Prabhu about the 7 habits of highly effective people and how it relates to Krishna consciousness. So it's something that I'm looking forward to. This is something which we've posted in our Empower and Preach membership site, and now we're sharing an extract of that for devotees who are listening to this podcast. If you want to hear more similar subjects, then you can come over to the Empower and Preach membership site and become a member. It's depending on when you listen to this, the membership site may or may not be open, but you can always go to successfulvaishnavas.com and you'll see that there's a few different options you can choose and put yourself on the waiting list for the next time that the membership opens. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Damodar in a second, but first I'll just do a little bit of a recap. Today is the Shringadev's appearance day, and last night we had a special festival for kids. We thought that if we do it the day before, we don't have to worry about the fasting and all that kind of thing. So we can do it according to our schedule. So we arranged this festival because we've often found that when kids come to the temple, they feel a bit out of place. There's nothing much happening for them. They watch the adults doing the kirtan and the abhishek and so on. But they don't feel that it's their place, and most of the time they end up just playing outside, or they're kind of in the program, but they're not feeling that engaged with it. So we thought, let's have a special festival, and we held this at Bhakti Marg Mataji's place, and she did a great job in organising things, as well as all the people that came had different ideas. So Krishnananda Prabhu, he's the principal of Hare Krishna School, he and his wife both told stories about Lord Nrsingadev in Mayapur, and that was really cool. Really amazing stories that give you a lot of faith in the Lord. And we did a very short skit, a drama of Lord Nrsingadev. First we did it in English, and then we did the same drama again in very simple Sanskrit. So that was a way to think of Lord Nrsingadev and also learn Sanskrit at the same time, so that was cool. We finished it up with a disco with Krishna conscious music and glow sticks and a disco ball and things like this. So that was really cool. And then before the disco, probably the highlight of the night, the most unique feature was this, I like to call it a trail of horror. Basically what happened is Bhakti Marg Mataji, she organised different sections of her property, different kind of things happening, and 2 by 2 the children would go out, an adult and a child together usually, they'd be going out to visit these different places, where different freaky things are happening. And it was all related to Prahlad Maharaj, how they tried to throw him off a big mountain, they tried to stab him with tridents and poison him and all these things. So she kind of like reenacted all of these different pastimes of Prahlad Maharaj and created a kind of a cool, freaky experience for kids. Here in New Zealand it's autumn, so it's pretty much the same season that Halloween happens in other countries in the Northern Hemisphere. So for us it was a little bit like a transcendental Halloween. It was a great night, it was a lot of fun. And it reminded me also a project I was working on with Prana Prabhu, which is on pause at the moment, but it was the School of Bhakti, and the idea was how to engage parents and kids together to improve the Krishna consciousness of our children, and to build the relationship with the parents and children. So last night was a great example of that kind of thing. So that was a wonderful experience of Nrsingadev's Parents' Day, and then tonight we'll have the traditional temple program, which is Abhishek and Kirtan, and then of course Prasadam. Just going back to the previous episode 16, I interviewed Pierre Adele, who's the famous musician, and unfortunately I got to find out as soon as I'd posted the article that that Prabhu's actually no longer following Krishna consciousness, and that when he left he was in quite a negative mood towards Krishna consciousness. Now, I don't know the details. I've asked some Russian devotees to let me know what, who were his complaints, because it would be useful for us to know that and see are there things that we need to do to improve, to make people feel more welcome in our society. Anyway, so what I did is after posting, I felt a little embarrassed that, one devotee wrote to me and said, this devotee's not even a devotee anymore. I was like, okay. So I made another post up on successfulvaishnavas.com, which you can check out. You'll find the link to it in the show notes for today's episode, Successful Vaishnavas 17. successfulvaishnavas.com/17. And you'll also find at the bottom of the post for episode 16, I also put a link to an article that I wrote, which is how do we treat people when they leave Krishna consciousness? Because when I was researching what happened with Pierre Adele, it was interesting some of the responses that other devotees were giving to him after he left. So I thought that was interesting. Now today, I'm also trying a new experience. The City Impact Church is a big church here in Auckland, and it's got a couple of really massive branches that are on TV almost every day. And they're opening a branch right near my house, so I thought it's a good opportunity to check it out, being the opening day of the church here, to see what they do. I've read The Purpose-Driven Church and found the ideas, and they're really interesting. So I thought I'd come and check out what they do. I know that Srila Prabhu visited that church about 2010 or 2011 to get some inspiration for his preaching ideas. So I thought, well, hey, I'm keen to check it out and see what we can learn from them as well. And I was thinking I might even I might visit a few different churches and different places like that to get a sense of, what they're doing, because a lot of these churches have really grown and developed strong congregations. So I thought it would be an interesting project. And then to take the principles that I learned from these churches and see how we can apply it in Krishna consciousness. So within the Empower and Preach membership, I'll be developing this theme a lot. It's one of the branches of Empower and Preach. The basic branches are, our personal spiritual life and our sadhana and time management. Second of all, preaching Krishna consciousness. Another element of it is how we can create an income in a Krishna conscious way. And then finding community. How do we develop community? So I think from these churches we might be able to learn a few things about preaching and community in particular. And so we'll be discussing it and trying things out within the Empower and Preach community, the membership, and sharing with each other our successes and failures and our attempts to follow this, some of these new ideas. Or maybe not new ideas, but, different applications of timeless principles. So that's basically where I'm up to now. I'm just about to head into the church. It starts in 5 minutes, so I think I might just do a quick little Facebook Live before I go in. But in today's episode, where we'll be speaking with Damodar Prabhu, he's a great friend and mentor of mine. when I came to Krishna consciousness, he did Bhagavad Gita classes in the evenings, and he took me under his wing, and he really inspired me to preach and to take up Krishna consciousness seriously. Before I met him, I used to come to the temple, but I wasn't really that engaged or active. But he said, and he gave me the vision that actually I can make a difference and I can become a preacher. So with that inspiration, I became a brahmachari. I took up book distribution and just really took it up as my mission to try to help not only become Krishna conscious myself, but to spread to others. So Damodar Prabhu, he's been a devotee from a young age. I think he became a devotee through his uncle. And now in his family there's 4 generations of devotees. So that means child, mother, grandmother and great-grandfather, all in one family, all devotees, which is amazing. So he's been the temple president at Soho Street in London, as well as Bhaktivedanta Manor. And then following that, he took up a role in Stephen Covey's organisation, teaching 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and teaching organisational leadership, which he continues to do today. He's also worked for Price Waterhouse and other really big firms. So he's got a lot of experience in the big wide world out there, as well as within ISKCON. And so we've got a lot that we can learn from him in today's discussion. He's a fantastic kirtaneer as well, which we won't be experiencing in today's interview, but hopefully we can maybe share some of that at a later date. But in particular today, he's looking at the 7 habits of highly effective people and how it relates to Krishna consciousness, both in general and specifically we were looking at 2 areas. One was improving our japa, because we know that from our research, our surveying of devotees, this is obviously our key process of devotional service, and an area that devotees have a lot of challenges with. So we focused on that topic, as well as relationships, which is another area that came out as a challenge with devotees in our movement today. So with that said, I will hand you over to the interview with Damodar Prabhu, and I look forward to speaking to you again next week. Hare Krishna. So we're here to talk about the 7 habits and how it relates to Krishna consciousness. What would you have to say?
I was introduced to the 7 habits by His Holiness Sridhar Maharaj. It should have been early 90s. I think I'd just become the TP at Soho Street. And Maharaj was really driving a focus on excellence, particularly on the visitor experience to an ISKCON temple. And this was the medium that he thought was particularly useful, a book by Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it was particularly helpful for me because I was already maxed out as a temple manager, and just quickly realizing that not everyone would love you for being a temple manager. In fact, you spend most of the day just disappointing people that you can't deliver on their expectations. And so I found it personally useful. I'd been a TP for a few years previously at Belfast, and started to think about the role of competence, just basic managerial competence, in supporting a temple president to do their service. Whether it was just like how to run a meeting well, or how to listen to somebody, or how to manage your time. And so the Covey stuff became really interesting. I think one of the first interesting things was principles. So making decisions based on sound principles, not arbitrarily. I think there was a tendency that decisions would be untrusted by the devotee community, because they didn't really know on what basis the decision had been made, whereas we figured if we could actually figure out what was the principle that applied, there'd be a certain degree of trustworthiness behind any decision that's made, and it would be more readily accepted. And so for several different reasons, these concepts really resonated and appealed. I think it was also being promoted at the time by Naveen Krishna Prabhu, who was the GBC for management. And he was trying to build a community of practice amongst temple leaders. And myself, a fellow devotee, Paramakaruna, Sridhar Maharaj, and Naveen Krishna Prabhu all went off to Florida and got certified within ISKCON to train the 7 habits of highly effective people. And I think we started rolling out programs in '95. I think the first one was in the Prasada room at Bhaktivedanta Manor. and we had about 30 odd devotees come. Most of the national leaders came. I have to say it was, we were very fortunate because His Holiness Sri Ram Swami sort of sponsored the event, personally came, personally attended. And that made it easy to get other people's buy-in. I think there was a bit of controversy because even though you could say it's just yukta vairagya, it's utilising tools that might not have been designed with Krishna in mind but can be dovetailed in Krishna's service. Because this is in the realm of ideas, I think some devotees think it invades Prabhupada's sacred space, Prabhupada's unique authority space. And I don't see it that way at all. I just see it as sort of helpful tips for living, just as you might use a car or a typewriter or a computer. The instrument itself is completely neutral. What you employ it to do is everything. And we saw the same thing. This is just a form of knowledge. Perhaps at the most basic level, psychological insights as to what makes people tick. And just certain tools, how to listen, how to settle on your values, how to build your life around those values, priorities, how to relate effectively. Really basic stuff. Very useful.
All right, so I was telling you before about how, I developed this Mayapur success formula, which has got the different elements. And after doing the survey with the devotees, the key issue was completing rounds, japa.
Yeah.
So I was thinking it would make sense to look at it in the same way from the point of view of the 7 habits. Like,
Okay.
How we can, first of all, actually get the habit of, getting our rounds done every day. And then from there, improving the quality as well.
So any habit based on the Covey idea is a combination of knowledge, desire, and skill. I suppose knowledge is the conceptual reinforcement. So to me, being regularly exposed to Prabhupada's teachings about the importance of chanting the Maha Mantra should actually put that top of mind. And, chanting is generally a response to something you've imbibed, so what you've heard initially. Desire is obviously how badly you want it. Sometimes that means you have to have a good beat up by the material energy before you become desperate to chant Hare Krishna. And skill, I think, is the attention that you put in. I mean, vibrating the sound, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. There's no great complexity to that, but the skill, I think, is of completely bringing back the mind. My own experience is that when I'm attentive, the taste is much higher. Much of the chore of chanting is when the mind's actually just been allowed to go completely ill-disciplined and flabby and wandered all over the shop. And after a while, I think just the fruit of the offensive chanting comes back as, I'm over this, which is a course of a wrestling with the mind. So maybe if I start relating it to the 7 habits to some extent.
Yeah.
If I talk very broadly, so these are 7 habits that anyone can cultivate, and you can direct them towards anything. They're almost meta living principles or something, best way to describe them. So the first of those is to be proactive. Proactivity essentially means taking responsibility, and perhaps the perfect exemplar of all of this is Srila Prabhupada. He didn't allow adverse conditions to throw him off. He didn't wait for some perfect conditions to make something happen. He proacted. His Guru Maharaj gave him a mission. He made it his life and soul. He went without even any hope or expectation of return over to America, and wasn't deterred by various setbacks. Now, I think this is quite an important principle when it comes to chanting, because our resolve will be tested throughout our spiritual lives. Covey often talks about proactivity is to subjugate one's temporary moods to one's commitment to principles. I think a lot of devotees get disillusioned with adverse things that happen to them in life. And that could be a reason to either lose faith with Krishna consciousness in generally, certainly lose faith with the organization, often become cynical, so develop a cynical mood towards devotees or towards Krishna consciousness. And so proactivity is about that ability to ride out the mind's trying to shake us off our purpose. The Bhagavad Gita talks about a puryamanam achala pratishtam, that, the self-realized person allows the thoughts to come in and just drift through, a little bit like a sea is always being filled with the rivers, but isn't disturbed by it. So proactivity would be somehow preserving that central purpose that ultimately my success lies with chanting Hare Krishna. I think that allows you in the moment to bring your mind back when you detect that it's wandered. And I think it also helps you push through times when you're just not into it. And that would be a way of proacting.
So I think one of the ideas of the proactivity is that responsibility, like you talked about, not blaming others or circumstances, for what's happening.
Well, there's lots of different concepts, sub-concepts within it. So Covey talks about 4 things that separate human beings from animals, which is a really interesting theme for devotees. Self-awareness, which is a lot about self-scrutiny and self-inquiry. If we explore that with, some examples that Prabhupada would give. A dog doesn't have big questions about the universe and the meaning of life. He doesn't even know why he chases postmen. He's just following instincts. And whatever feelings, his mind, whatever prompts, there's no filter. There's no, does that fit with my principles? Is that ethical? No consulting of conscience. Instinct behavior. Human beings have that gift to actually question and analyze behavior. And that's one of the things that can separate us from the various stimuli that life, throws in our direction. Another thing then is imagination, the ability to conceive of alternative possibilities that aren't here now. I think a lot of perseverance in Krishna consciousness comes from maintaining that sense of what we're about and what's possible and where we really want to head to. Conscience, checking in with one's value system. And independent will or discipline, resolve. We've got to be fixed on that non-distracting single principle that Lotus Sutra Spirited Master telling the Maha Mantra is the goal. So I think proactivity can be a really helpful thing. You can apply it to every aspect of Krishna consciousness. You can apply it to every aspect of life. It fundamentally recognizes that our life isn't a function of conditions. We have our karmic conditions, but then we have choices. And the choices that we make, we're entirely responsible for. No one can make you miserable. No one can make you deviant. No one can destroy your spiritual life. So that sense of full responsibility in my life is what I make of it, is an expression of proactivity. Shall I go on?
Yeah. Should we move on to the next habit?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So again, begin with the end in mind. Prabhupada's a perfect exemplar that he conceived of everything he wanted to design within ISKCON way before he manifested it. The famous conversation with that Mr. Cohen or whatever his name is on a park bench in New York, many years before stuff had manifest. He talked of this international society with schools and farms and multi-generation, devotee community. And at that point, it was just a dream in his head. But the logic is, habit 2, begin with the end in mind. Everything starts out as that intention. And if we've clearly developed an intention, chances are that will manifest. If we start a meeting without a clear agenda, chances are it'll be a waste of time. If we start putting up a house without a decent blueprint, chances are it will cost us way much more money and probably look a bit ugly and messy. You could apply the same thing to a marriage. You can apply the same thing to your life. So it is about design your life. So begin with the end in mind can very much be about getting in touch with your true life priorities. One of the actions we often used to take people through when delivering workshops was building a mission statement. Who are all the people that you value, and what's the kind of impact that you want to have with those people? Well, probably one of your biggest roles would be Jiva, eternal servant of Krishna, eternal servant of Guru Maharaj, which would make one of your fundamental daily priorities your connection with Krishna, your chanting, your reading. There's lots of stuff that we have to do in life to get busy, but if we're trying to design a life around certain principles, this would suggest that we, prioritize, and chanting would be not at the mercy of everything else. But yeah, you can also design your temple community using the same principle. What's the experience I want people to have? Lets me to now design the processes to deliver that experience. You can look at that in relation to your children. What kind of adult would I like them to grow into? What kind of character would I like them to form? And you can design your parenting accordingly. Just like Prabhupada, we're not controllers that can guarantee the results. But that clarity of focus, that regular checking of, am I on track with the life that I wish to create, is a really useful meditation. I think Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur said every Ekadashi you should ask yourself, well, what progress have I made since the last Ekadashi? And that evaluation and taking stock, again, leads to a more purposeful existence than drifting or just being dragged around by the various demands that the world chucks at us. Same principle appears in other cultures. Socrates, the unexamined life isn't worth living. So devotees can be a bit lazy on this one, because sometimes our identity and purpose is literally handed to us by the Vedas. And if we haven't truly reconciled whether I'm not just accepting that as a cognitive piece of direction, but it's actually aligned with my heart, my soul, my head, my behavior, sometimes we only have a surface understanding, just a philosophical or conceptual grasp of that without a deep, heartfelt commitment and taking stock.
Yeah, there's an interesting idea that comes to my mind in this discussion is about the individuality. Like, we've got a common goal that we all have as devotees that we read in Prabhupada's books, but then there's also the individual application of it. And I guess we need to adapt the end goal and our path to it according to our own position now and our own nature. And like, I often think of that example of the boat, the yacht, that it wants to get to the destination, the waves are coming, and depending on the type of yacht, you'll take a different approach. One of these America's Cup yachts can go quite tight on the wind, it can go quite direct.
Right.
But others that are, in an old boat that's not so streamlined will have to go a little bit more across the wind to be able to make the same progress. But,
And life rarely facilitates a direct line, but if you never lose sight of your goal, the ultimate expression of begin with the end in mind is ante narayana smriti, that the moment we leave this life,
right,
we need to be completely focused. So you could say that the whole of Krishna consciousness is around preparing for the end of this life, that our consciousness is in the right shape. But even, for instance, if you think about fulfilling a role within ISKCON, what are the purposes? What are the real measures of success? And a really purposeful person is always asking that. Otherwise, it's very easy just to get locked into habituated ways of doing things that might have served a purpose that was valid at a point in history, but have often ceased to be the necessary means anymore. And you often see that in religious organizations. You often see it in lives where people keep banging their head against a brick wall because it once produced a result and have actually lost sight of the real goal. So that idea of regularly checking your compass, occasionally you might have to deliberately steer somewhat off course, but you never lose sight of where you want to end up. And you make your decisions accordingly.
So bringing it back to the chanting again, like particularly japa and, daily sadhana, how would we apply it in this case in particular? Like, I guess you've talked about reflection as a really important thing to see how's my progress in my chanting and my consciousness, my attention, or even just the basis, did I chant all my rounds this last couple of weeks,
Even planning your day. What's going to be the most favourable time of day? When will I be in the best consciousness? Let me block out that time.
Right, otherwise it's like, yeah, I've got to chant 16 rounds. Sometime in the day I'll probably do it. And then the day goes by. Oh, what happened? The time went by. It's like, you have to actually block it in, because if you want to do 16 rounds, it's basically a 2-hour block. And it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. You have to actually make that time and plan for it, right? You have to think ahead.
And the same thing, for instance, to listen to Prabhupada's lectures or read his books, or even just associate with devotees. If you haven't ultimately really committed heart and soul to it, which goes further than a floating intention, it means typically good calendar management, then life will conspire to steal the available time. Prabhupada often tells us that Maya is really there to test our resolve. And she seems to be very inventive at coming up with hurdles. And if we haven't really got that strong burning desire and focus, very easy just to get distracted and waylaid. I particularly think that Vyavasaya Atmikabudhya verse is very pertinent. Prabhupada often made reference to it being the secret of success in spiritual life, focusing on the order of the spiritual master, that being our sole purpose, that all advancement comes from pleasing the Guru, so have no other desires, ana kariho mani asa. Then that sort of informs our choices, whereas as soon as you lose sight of that goal, many branch.
Yeah, it's interesting because that word priority itself is a singular. It's a singular thing. You can't talk about priorities. It's incorrect grammar. There's no such thing as priorities. Priority can only be one from a technical, grammatical point of view. It's kind of interesting.
And yeah, it's exactly how we're not allowed. Nowadays, for instance, we have more incoming messages than we've ever had. On a daily basis, I'm checking WhatsApp, Facebook, email, LinkedIn, and phone messages and voicemail messages, and literally just staying on top of everything everyone wants to communicate to you can consume every moment. And my experience is most of those things are quite enervating as well. They sap energy. One of the next ideas that we'll look at is time management, and
it seems a natural progression to the next.
Right? Some people argue that it's not really time management because we don't actually control kala, we don't control time, but it's actually energy management, and it's about having the right energy for the right things. And so, again, if japa is a true priority, when can we give the best of ourselves to that activity? And of course, there's no better time than Brahma Muhurta. But, sometimes people have to organize their days differently. But if they're organizing it with the end in mind, japa will never be on the, I'll carry it over to another day. I'm sure we've all done it. But to me, that would be a sign that the end in mind has slipped.
Yeah, that concept of energy management's an interesting idea, because I experience it that there's slumps and there's energetic times of the day. So choosing, instead of fighting to do something when your energy is down, then you allow yourself to rest at those times, and then when your energy's high, then you really put your attention to the important things.
So habit 3 is put first things first. So it's a direct extension of the other habit. If your highest value is to write books for saving humanity, then that is your priority to which your time is devoted. And we can see Srila Prabhupada was very disciplined about where his time went. Very early on, he was saying, I want to hand management over and delegate that and train you up. Just invest in a few mentoring relationships to bring you leaders on to actually carry the responsibilities of managing the society. My focus is books. And we can see how many hours of the day Srila Prabhupada focused on. He gave his most attentive focus to that time, even though he took on a huge amount of activities. I mean, Prabhupada's structure to his day is really a very interesting structure. So getting up after bare minimal sleep, writing during those really sacred hours of the day, doing his rounds, giving the morning class, a morning walk, so a little bit of exercise and a little bit of teaching to disciples and so on. Some correspondence, some managerial affairs, massage, a couple of meals.
Naps.
Yeah, it was a very well-tuned, focused day. And putting first things first is that recognition. Everything's not of equal value. So what are the first things to me? And how do I represent that that's where the majority of my time goes? So again, an extension from the last habit, begin with the end in mind, is asking yourself, what is my most valuable contribution that deserves and warrants the best of my time? As we said, most of us have lots of complex roles. It's very easy if you're a temple manager to be entirely consumed by the managerial duties. They're almost never done. In fact, deciding what to neglect is often an important part of the decision-making. You could easily do that to the exclusion of your rounds. I think that's been a casualty for many devotees. Certainly it can be to the expense of working on devotee relationships, having time just to listen to somebody or explore or associate. It's often for many people been at the expense of morning programs. The challenge that most people face as grihastas is just how many hours are involved in making $1 these days. By the time we've attended to just domestic chores and perhaps things to do with parenting and so on, got ourselves to work and back, just survived and stayed alive, we might be down to the last couple of discretionary hours in a day.
Yeah. And
if we haven't decided very deliberately how that's going to be about japa and reading and associating or other Krishna conscious pursuits, if it's at the fag end of our day when we're just beaten up from the long commute and hassled meetings all day, it could easily just be blobbing in front of the prajalpa box. Not the best use of the human form of life. So that idea of being very judicious with time and focusing on the longer term, prayas and shreyas comes in with habit 3, put first things first. So are we just focusing on the immediate, the here and now, or are we thinking of the longer range things? Because often immediate things solve today's problem but ignore the problems coming down the road. So a lot of this is about having that vision of what we're trying to create in the society. A lot of managers in the society end up almost having a hand-to-mouth survival form of management, staffing the roster for today, just getting through the next month's finances. Haven't thought about how do I design this community? What are the investments of time that I need to put in to build succession into the talent pipeline in the temple? Cultivate the right kind of relationships with different constituent groups within the temple. Quite often we're simply passively serving people who are coming, and outreach and other longer range things get neglected. None of this is easy. None of these habits are easy. They're actually in some ways counterintuitive. Srila Prabhupada, if he hadn't been judicious, could have easily been completely engulfed by managerial woes. And it was quite a disciplined step. People might tacitly even criticize Prabhupada for handing so much over to seemingly unqualified people. But Prabhupada was building capacity for the future and investing and divesting himself of lesser important to focus on the truly major contributions like his books. So putting habit 2 and 3 together, what's the major contribution that we'd wish to make, and how do we design our life, including our calendar, so that we're doing justice to that? What's our end in mind as parents, and how can we invest as true Krishna conscious parents in what kind of devotees our kids are going to become, as opposed to just managing them out of bed, managing to brush their teeth, managing to clean their room, managing to do their homework, managing to school, managing the after-school activities. That's just management. When do we start to actually do the work of parenting?
It's interesting when you mentioned parenting and also Prabhupada's program. The principle of routines. Like if every day is different, you can never be peaceful because your mind is thinking, oh, what do I have to do now? Or should I do this or should I do that? And you can see Prabhupada was very regulated. Like, subtly. Even though he traveled so many places, every day had the same routine. He'd do his massage at a certain time, have his nap at a certain time, his meals at a certain time, his morning program, And it's the same thing with children. If you want life to be easy with the children, then you develop a routine so that you don't have to drag the kids out of bed every morning. It's like, this is what happens this time, this happens, and you just kind of flow through it without having to use your limited mental, what do they call it? Decision fatigue, that, save that decision fatigue for, focusing your mind when you're doing a japa or something like that,
Yeah, and so much of the fruit of it is focus, and it's true. Regulation is a sattvic way of operating. Part of the challenge in Kali Yuga Manda Sumanda Mateo is we're completely haphazard and always disturbed, and life is becoming more and more disturbing. If you look back to the 50s, probably most families could actually get by on one salary and had a lot more discretionary time.
Yeah.
Somehow or other, as Srila Prabhupada would point out, with all our advancement and all our gadgets and all of our, technological advancements, we've actually reduced quality of life.
The office doesn't finish at 5 o'clock. It follows you into your bed with your phone, and the notifications you're talking about before, they're going off at every, so the idea of trying to stick to our regulation is challenged at practically every second or every minute by some sort of distraction or notification or something.
Well, in some ways, habit 2, begin with the end in mind, is about really cultivating that ardent desire to focus on the ultimate goal, which in many ways gives you the strength to resist distractions. So much of habit 3, put first things first, is about dealing with distractions. There's some research that says 50 to 60% of people's day is actually taken up with unplanned activity, interruptions, or almost avoidant activities, We've got so beaten up by life that so much energy goes into escaping, but it's short-term escaping. It's numbing the pain rather than truly extricating ourselves from Maya's entanglement. So Facebook's a classic example. You can literally be distracted all day. And these media have been designed, in fact, to entrap the consciousness. I was listening to a podcast recently that was talking about how Facebook's economic model is based on click-throughs. And so there's a lot of stuff there that's a paid advert, and all the person who's set that advert cares is if you click on it. And so they actually continue to serve you stuff that you typically do click on. So if you're an angry person that spends a lot of time being angry and outraged, that will be what will fill your newsfeed, because they know that
that's what you respond to.
That's what you respond to. And if every time they get you to click, they get some dollars. Can you imagine how scary that is? That literally means we've allowed our minds to determine our reality. Like, there's so much shock about why Trump won the election. And in many ways, it was a Facebook election that people were so lost in their little echo chambers. The only news they were getting was from Facebook. So their whole view of the world, their value system, was just informed by advertisers exploiting their mental moods.
Well, it's amazing what you're talking about. It was just like the law of attraction, like what we focus on expands. And now you've got this platform, Facebook, and its artificial intelligence is directly manifesting that,
And in many ways, the more we fall in love with technology and actually hand over choices to algorithms and artificial intelligence and all of these things, the more we will reap a whirlwind of a completely uncontrolled mind with no clear sense of values. So again, Prabhupada's example is always the best example of a really regulated and disciplined life focused on true value, focused on the ultimate principles of life. So together, those first 3 habits, proactivity, clear end in mind, and the discipline to put first things first, constitute what's called a private victory. So the whole idea that anything we try and achieve in the external world is fundamentally an expression of how well our inner world is ordered and disciplined. And those are just 3 kind of organizing ideas. They're pretty much a form of sattva gun. It's probably a good way to think of them. They're not inconsistent with Vedic truths. They stop short of, Vedic revelations. But then in the spirit of Yukta Vairagya, let's adopt anything that potentially adds value and can help us if it's favorable towards Krishna consciousness. So that then builds a platform for the public victory, which is about relationships with others.
So there you have the first half of the interview with Damodar Prabhu. The actual interview went for more than an hour, and so I thought it was a little bit long for one podcast, and I thought we can break it up into 2 parts. So we've already posted the whole thing in our Empower and Preach membership area for members of the Empower and Preach community, but we will be releasing it in the next podcast as well. So I hope you enjoyed that interview with Damodar Prabhu talking about private victory, and next week we'll continue with the second part on public victory. So just another reminder about successfulvaishnavas.com. You can go there to get the show notes for this episode. It's successfulvaishnavas.com/17, because this is episode 17. And when you're at successfulvaishnavas.com, make it a point to sign up for the notifications so that you can be kept up to date for all future episodes. And you also have the chance to go on the waiting list for the Empower and Preach membership site. On the homepage of Successful Vaishnavas, you'll find that there's some options that you can choose according to what describes you best. And then after you've clicked on that button, you'll get some information about the Empower and Preach community and have the chance to sign up for the waiting list. So we're hoping to open up membership again shortly. Of course, it depends when you're listening to this. But in any case, sign up for the waiting list and we'll let you know as soon as we're opening up membership again. Because we always like to invite devotees who are inspired to join our community. But we also like to serve those that are in the community, so we only open up membership from time to time. So with that said, I look forward to meeting you again next week when we get to hear again from Damodar Prabhu, and this time about public victory. Until then, make your life successful. Hare Krishna. Thanks for listening. To find out more, go to successfulvaishnavas.com.
Whatever little service that anyone can do for Krishna is to be appreciated and celebrated.
Just give this life to Krishna.
We know that they have much more potential than they're presently using.
I went to a place of relishing the activity and letting go of the result completely.
You just associate with pure devotees. Then you shall be able to cross over the ocean of Nisan.